morning, everyone. My name is James Wall, Fire Chief of King Fire Emergency Services, Township of King. I'd like to welcome all of our guests today to the Remembrance Day ceremony here at the Schomberg Cenotaph at the Trisan Centre, November 11th, 2020. I'd like to welcome our guests, our elected officials, our Schomberg Lions Club, our Canadian Armed Forces, as well as York Regional Police, and all our viewers at home. As well, I'd be remiss if I didn't follow this agenda closely. I would not want to fail in recognizing the people that have been listed here. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on today is the traditional territory to many First Nations, including the Chippewas of Georgiana Island and the Mississaugas of the Credit. These lands are now home to many diverse Indigenous people. We also acknowledge that York Region falls under Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties with several Mississauga and Chippewas First Nations. Today, unlike years past, we have restricted attendance due to COVID-19. However, we know that we want to take this moment to honor those who have served this country with honor and have sacrificed much more for what we enjoy today, both freedom and peace. At this point, I'm going to read from the honor roll. We remember those brave men of King Township who, with courage, fought and sacrificed for our country. In the Great War of 1914 to 1918, Lieutenant Jack Sidey, Sergeant Major Charles W. Woodruff, Lance Corporal James A. Ralston, Lance Corporal Ewart Wickers, Lance Corporal James A. Ralston, Lance Corporal Carl Granger, Corporate John Folliott, Private William J. Doyle, Private Wilfred Laurier Doyle, Private Maxwell Doyle, Private Edward Douglas, Private John Ferguson, Private Leonard Ferguson, Private Foss McMaster, Private Leslie D. Martin, Private Arthur Payne, Private Joseph Agar, Private Harold Brown, Private Sherman Brown, Private William Christopher, Private Russell Clift, Private George Howard, Private Arthur Kay, Private Bert Leland, Private Telford Little, Private Roscoe Phillips, Private John Rutledge, Private Ernie Watson, Private Oscar Webb. In the World War II, 1939 to 1945, Canadian Army, Sergeant Alan Wyatt, Lance Corporal Russ Rutherford, Lance Corporal Clifford Dalton, Trooper Andrew Snedden, Gunner James R. Premu, Private Thomas A. Duggan. From our Royal Canadian Air Force, Squadron Leader Harry L. Kay, Flight Lieutenant William Pagan, and Sergeant Mason A. Edwards. And some of these names are actually inscribed on this cenotaph right beside me. We give thanks and honor for those who served alongside of them since then. We do have one guest here today, Corporal Mike Topp, who served in the auxiliary, the Israeli Army, and he's a veteran from then. As well, today we have in-person wreath layers. Representing the Government of Canada, MP and Minister of Seniors, Deb Schulte, as well as representing the Canadian Armed Forces, Lieutenant Colonel retired Susan Beharriell. Representing the Government of Ontario, MPP, and Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce. Representing the Township of King, Mayor Steve Pellegrini. Representing York Regional Police, Inspector Peter Casey. Representing the Township of King Fire and Emergency Services and our Honor Guard, Volunteer Firefighter Neil Nicholas. Prior to today's ceremony, there was wreaths that were laid in remembrance from multiple community groups. I will read the list here for you. Schomberg Agricultural Society, King Township Library, Schomberg Minor Hockey League, King United Soccer, St. Patrick's Catholic School, Schomberg Public School, Knights of Columbus, Catholic Women's Leagues, Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, Dufferin Marsh Nature Connection, Schomberg Lions Club, Arts Society of King, Schomberg Village Association, Schomberg Horticultural Society, the Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, RCMP, as well as the Schomberg Village Before and After program, Schomberg Public School. At this point, I'd like to introduce and call forward Lieutenant Colonel retired Susan Beharriell. She'll be reading In Flanders Field by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae.
In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, May 3, 1915. battlefield of Ypres. The day before he wrote his famous poem, one of McCrae's closest friends was killed in the fighting and buried in a makeshift grave with a simple wooden cross. Wild poppies were already beginning to bloom between the crosses marking the many graves. Unable to help his friend or any of the patients who had died, John McCrae gave them a voice through this poem. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunsets glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you with falling hands we throw the torch, yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. It was an Australian journalist working in London who thought that we should pause on this day. He was distressed by the way that men and women had danced to celebrate the Armistice Day, the end of the First World War. He wrote a letter to the Evening News, a major newspaper in London, England. Wouldn't silence be more appropriate than dancing, he wrote. And so, some 98 years later, we stand in silence and remember. And so at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, when I stand in silence, and the bugle plays, and the firemen march, and the flags whip in the cold wind, and the leaden clouds hang low in the sky, the memory of which we speak is not my memory. It's not a memory of something I've ever known. I have not experienced the mud of the trenches, the roar of the cannon, mustard gas, carpet bombing, suicide bombers, IEDs, or the stench of death. I have never known that kind of war. Not my grandfathers, not my great-grandfathers, my great-uncles, my grandfathers, not my uncles, not my fathers. So why then do I remember? For those of us born during peacetime, all war seems far removed from our daily lives. We often take for granted our Canadian values and institutions, our freedom to participate in cultural and political events, and our right to live under the government of our choice. The Canadians who go off to war in distant lands go in the belief that the values and beliefs enjoyed by Canadians are being threatened. They believe that without freedom, there can be no enduring peace. And without peace, there can be no enduring freedom. I do not need to have been there myself to remember what was done on my behalf during World War I, World War II, Korea, peacekeeping operations over many years, and Afghanistan, for example, and appreciate Canadian operations going on today. And neither do you. I think of Remembrance Day as an opportunity to say thank you. Perhaps you will as well. Thank you to the hundreds of thousands of Canadian men and women who put their own lives on hold in order to defend our way of life. Thank you to the thousands who made the ultimate sacrifice so that we may live in a peaceful and prosperous Canada today. They believe that by acting today, they can make a difference, and a significant difference, into the future. It is up to us to ensure that their dream of peace is realized. On Remembrance Day, We say thank you for the courage and sacrifice of those who have and still do serve on our behalf. It is our responsibility to continue the work for peace for which they fight so valiantly. This is why I remember. The last post, written in 1790, is a British Army bugle call that signaled the soldiers that the night watch had been posted and inspected. The powder was dry, the garrison was safe, their duties were completed, and that now they could sleep. The Rouse was used to get everyone up out of bed in the morning. Warfare evolved, and bugle calls were no longer required. Tradition changed. Use of the last post, the 2-minute silence, and the Rouse at cenotaph ceremonies in Commonwealth countries essentially turns them into a ritualized night vigil. The last post is sounded at military funerals to indicate that the soldier has gone to their final rest. Playing the Rouse in the ceremony carries a subtle Christian reference to Judgment Day and symbolizes resurrection. Please rise for the last post, 2 minutes of silence, the Rouse, and the remainder of the ceremony. Binion wrote a poem to honor the war dead of World War I. Since then, a section of it has been incorporated into Remembrance Day services around the world as a tribute to all casualties of war. Please repeat the last line after me. The act of remembrance. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
As we finish up today's ceremony, there's one last thing I'd like to read. It's called World Peace Prayer, and it's marked anonymous. To those who did not come home, lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. Amen. I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance today on November 11th, 2020. It's a different time, but still we're able to attend a Remembrance Day ceremony. I'd like to finish off, lest we forget. Thank you.